thank you, and really appreciate being able to be here, talking to all of you, and it's really cool to see that there's game development all around the world, and that the IGDA is spreading in every corner of the world. I'm gonna start my. I'm not gonna take too much of your time. I'm gonna get straight into business. That's how we like it in Finland. We tried to do you should be able to see my presentation. There should be IGDA Finland on the screen right now. Can you confirm?
Yes, it is showing.
Yeah. So we tried. You're gonna just have to accept that there's the tab there because we did not get it to work. I usually do this in Google Meet. Zoom is Zoom, and that's what it is. But yeah. So I'm here to talk to you about IGDA, and specifically IGDA Finland, because we're using that as an example of how to do like small beginnings. And some of you might know IGDA from before. Some of you might even heard about IGDA Finland, but let's get down to it. But first, I'd like to do a quick introduction of myself. So my name is Häll, and just to get like a feel of what kind of person I am. So it's like, you know, since I was a kid, I've been doing board games, tabletop games, RPGs, video games, obviously. I started my stuff with one of these bad boys. Like when my dad had a computer, that's when I started playing games. I remember I couldn't quite, so I had to take a little chair and I went there, typed cd dash red baron.exe, hit enter, got into a game, didn't really know what was happening, but there was a lot of like, I got to shoot other planes, I got to fly. I was like, this is amazing, this is what I want. And that's what I've been doing since the early 90s. And you know, I've been doing RPGs, I've been making games, I've been making worlds and characters and stories for my whole life. Studied photography, went doing that for 7 years. Then I've been doing set design, I've been doing musical theater, and then I ended up in Australia because a long-term relationship ended up, and I was like, I want to get as far away from Finland as possible. Australia seemed pretty good. Now that I think of Nepal, probably would have been as good, as interesting. But in Australia, I ended up doing all sorts of jobs and just giving me a little bit of perspective. And you know, honestly, I did construction, I did bus driving, I went to a restaurant. So I started as a dishwasher, became a sous chef, then I became a waiter, then I broke my arm, and that was it. I worked on farms, all sorts of stuff. But then after a couple of years, I came back to Finland. Photography had died, and that's when I entered IT. I went into sales. I did e-invoicing. And e-invoicing, while a great thing, it is absolutely astonishingly boring. So let's not go further there. But so how does this tie into IGDA? So, well, at this stage, completely by accident, I ran into IGDA. I was walking on the street and I saw there's a game industry event in Finland. What? That can't be true. This was like a while ago. So I went in and it looked really cool. So I joined and I started going to the events. I started helping out. But then I got a job offer from Scotland. I went to do technical translations for PlayStation. That was kind of cool. I even helped organize some of the IGDA Edinburgh events and talk with IGDA Scotland in general. And after that, for a couple of years, I came back to Finland, and I really threw myself into IGDA and hobbies. And then I was thinking like, hey, wait a minute, I play games, I plan games, I host games, I make games, I love games. Why wouldn't I work with games? So then via IGDA, because I met a lot of people there, I realized I could go study to make games. So I became an engineer, software engineer, and that was IGDA was my first step into game industry. Second step was studying. Now I teach game design at Metropolia. I also started a little company, like consultation company with a couple of other people. We made games for the Children's Hospital and vertical slice of other people's games. And now I'm like at Metaplay. And but the thing that has been a constant through the last 10 years for me has been IGDA. I started by visiting them, then I became a volunteer at IGDA Helsinki, then I became a coordinator at IGDA Helsinki, then I became a board member of IGDA Finland, and now I'm the chair of IGDA Finland. So that's really quickly about me, and you'll see why I talked a bit more depth about myself in a minute, but like quickly about IGDA, because now you know me. Maybe even more than you honestly wanted to know about me, but you know, here we are. So let's talk about the topic itself, IGDA. So first of all, as Jay mentioned, so it's the International Game Developers Association. That should give you a pretty good idea what we're about. So here's the official mission statement. IGDA supports and empowers and blah, blah, blah. That's like fancy speak for what we do, which is for devs, by devs, for the good of the devs. That's what we do. We're like, I want to make it clear. We are not here for the companies. We are not here for the games. We are here for the devs, for the individual devs. And we don't care if it's a indie, a hobbyist, someone who's been in the industry for a while, someone who's been in the industry for 30 years. We're there for all of them, and we're there to bring them together. And that's what we, so that's IGDA in a nutshell. But let's think about the IGDA Finland. And like all good things, we're going to need just a little bit of history to understand what happened. Because as I said, like the topic of this is IGDA and small beginnings, and that's what we're going to go through. Finnish game industry, two big factors. Number one, the demo scene. So this is like, honestly, that was like 80s, early 90s, essentially a bunch of nerds wanted to make cool shit on their computers, and they did. They pushed the technology further and further and made that cool stuff. And honestly, they just want to impress each other and just tinker with computers. And like, this might not look like a lot today, understandably. Like back then, it was honestly pretty mind-blowing. And it's been such an important part of this whole community and culture that in 2020, UNESCO added the Finnish demo scene to their list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity, which I think is pretty sick for a bunch of nerds, you know? But anyway, the history. At some point, these kids became older, they had to go work. Most of them just stopped doing this demo stuff. Some of them were like, hey, can't we make this into a game? Can this be our job? So yeah, they started pushing the technology with the actual idea of making a game. So let's skip a couple of years, we end up with Max Payne. And then later on, now we got city builders, we got console games, we got VR games, we got AAA, and the latest being Returnal. Absolutely my favorite game of last year. If you have a chance, check it out, amazing. But this is like where this side kind of grew on from. So that was a very simple version of how things went. But so that was essentially one of the big ways how people ended up in the industry. And then the second one, so this is a step two, the other one. I'm going to start with this with a question. How many of you know Nokia? How many of you have had a Nokia at some point? Because Nokia was absolutely massive. So they had heaps and heaps of people working for them. And then Nokia went down. And a lot of engineers and people with the know-how ended up without a job. So a lot of them just kind of went where they could, but a good portion of them wanted to start their own companies. And at the same time, we had something like smartphones happening. And that was a completely new untapped market. And we had the know-how, we had the technical knowledge. So we had a good head start. And that's when things started to happen. Things like Clash of Clans, Hill Climb Racing, Angry Birds, and like hundreds of others. Like Finland, 90% of Finnish game industry is mobile games. And if we're looking at a global perspective, mobile games generated around 35 billion euros in 2016. And out of that, Finland took 7%, which is an insane amount when you think how small Finland is. Finland is 6 times smaller than Nepal. We only have around 5 million people. It's honestly very small. And just like some quick facts here. So there's a little over 200 companies. There's over 3,000. I think the latest number is around 3,500 people working in it. And the revenue goes between 2 and 3 billion annually. And interestingly enough, over a quarter, 27% of the Finnish game industry are foreigners, because we just don't have enough people to support the industry. So if you've ever considered going somewhere where you can be cold and live in perpetual darkness for most of the year, now's your chance. But yeah, so, okay, cool. What does that have to do with IGDA? That's a good question. So what happened here is that we had these two different legs that the industry was built on. And it was quite small and quite tight in the beginning. So we had the kids with the demo scene, and they kind of knew each other. But then we also had the mobile side, and these people knew each other. And they kind of started mingling, you know, they both like IT and stuff, so they started mingling together. This started to foster kind of a familiar scene. where it felt like everyone is working towards a common goal. There's like this unofficial motto, what's good for the Finnish game industry is good for all of us. And this has stayed true even when the industry grew. And compared to a lot of other countries where companies are really zealously rigid about talking to other game companies or devs from other companies, this is something very, very unique. I've seen this with my own eyes, like in Scotland, I've seen it in Estonia, I've seen it in Germany. They're very strict about what their people are allowed to do, or what kind of events they're allowed to go. But now, even when Finnish game industry is as big as it have ever been, this is still a community, camaraderie. And this is kind of what we've been doing. Like, I'm not just here to toot our own horn, but like for nearly 2 decades now, we've been trying to help this community grow. And I think we've succeeded. And that's what I'm talking about here today. So we started in 2003. And even if the seeds were kind of put into the ground before that, you know, with Nokia and then the demo scene, with the like having a name, a collective, an organization that united and continues to unite all of these groups was absolutely essential. It has absolutely been like a massive boon for the games. Like it was a good thing that was made greater by this community called IGDA Finland. But it takes, like, I'm not gonna lie, it takes some time. Like I said, 2003 we started, and our very first meetups had like 5 to 10 people coming to them. But because we did it every month, because we stayed consistent, because we kept going year after year, we grew. And now we're kind of like, we're in Finland from south to the north. We have 14 different hubs around the country, and at each of these hubs, we do whatever we can to help devs in any way we can. But we're also like, we're growing. We're getting new hubs every now and then. Some older ones merge. On top of that, we have our first digital hub, which is restricted to geographical constraint. It does online stuff. We're still a completely non-profit thing, association. Everything is done by volunteers. We have veterans, we have newbies, and everything between working for us. All of our active volunteers have gone straight into the industry. And then I'm going to talk about Helsinki because that's where I live. That's where I create events. So I don't know the other hubs as well. So I'm just going to talk about Helsinki. So every month we have an event. Okay. During the pandemic, it was a little different, but like before and now after the pandemic, every month we have an event, and that's about 400 to 700 people. And we have seminars. We have like, it's essentially just a bunch of devs talking to each other. There's some, it's free to come. There's some free drinks. Which is usually really good for some shy devs, especially Finns, to, you know, kind of loosen up. Even though, honestly, these days we're trying to have we have pretty much as much non-alcoholic options as well, because it's not meant to be a booze fest. It's a meetup. So speaking of meetups, I'm going to talk about something else, but kind of related. And it'll make sense in the end, I promise. This is a dirty word, networking. Nobody, whenever you say networking, people are going to be like, whatever, man. I know, but that's why I'm kind of talking here about totally not networking. It'll make sense in a second. So let's see what networking is. When people say networking, they usually mean contacts or opportunities, market yourself, stay in the know, yada, yada, yada. But like, who cares about that? That's boring, right? That's super boring. I don't really believe in strictly professional networking where you go around with a business card, give it like, you know, in your hand and give it to people and throw out your CVs like they're going out of style. No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I want to talk about is not networking, because I firmly believe that the best kind of getting to know each other is casual hanging out. And that's what our meetups are. It's essentially a bunch of nerds hanging out, talking about nerd stuff. And we have all kinds of people in our meetups. We have 2D artists, 3D artists, animators, writers, sound designers, composers, UX designers, game designers, producers, like everything. Just anything you can think of that has to do with games, we have them. And you can talk about these sort of things with them, like from films to games, from music to tech. And I've learned so much and had a great time doing so just at our meetups by talking to people. But also, equally, if not more importantly, what we provide is a place for people to keep in touch with their old colleagues. So like I said, there's around 3,500 people working within the game industry in Finland. That's not a lot, but it's a fair amount. But because it's an old industry, you know, 30 years old industry, it means that people have changed their companies many times, and they go around or maybe their friends have left the companies, but they're still friends, but they don't get to meet so often. So what we do is that we try to keep those ties alive, because those are really important to keep our community alive. So that's what we're trying to work. Like, we want to give a place where everyone can, like a neutral ground where people can come, they can have a good time, be like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, what's up? And then, you know, and maybe share some ideas or help out, like, yeah, I've been thinking about this issue. And then you can, like, it's amazing to see that happen in real time. And this is all about the culture of sharing and transparency that IGDA Finland and IGDA has been working on for like over a decade, almost 2 decades. So that's kind of our that's our meetups, and that's what we're trying to do, and that's what has held not just the community but the game industry itself. And that's what we're going for, and that's what we do. So in the end, it's all about community, and by far, as I said earlier, our most important mission is to give them, the Finnish game devs, a place where they can gather, where they can keep those friendships and connections alive. And we do that every month, month after month, year after year, city after city. And you know, the pandemic hit us a little bit, but we're back. And even then we did online events. And this is absolutely the thing that has allowed the Finnish game industry to grow together as a whole, helping each other out. Like I said earlier, what's good for the Finnish game industry is good for all of us. This holds true. We could have started fighting against each other, but what would that have accomplished? Nothing but a lot of resentment and issues in the long run. This way the industry thrives, and we get to have fun events and parties. So, you know, it's a win-win for everybody. I'm not kidding when I say that this community, I can give you an example where, like, I'm not going to say the names of the companies, but let's take, we have company A, we have company B. Company A is dealing with an issue, like a problem Y, let's say, and they know that company B sometimes fixed that. So they reach out to company B, like, hey, we know you had this issue at some point and we're dealing with that. Can you help us out? So company B will say, oh yeah, we'll send Rita over. She'll show you what we did. And then like, oh cool. And then she goes over, and then they fix the issue, and maybe they'll send a consultation fee and pay a little bit. But then they help each other out, because the more Finland gets noticed, the more we get investments, the more we get people coming here, the better it is for all the companies. So it's just kind of like a positive feedback loop of itself that you have to create. But that starts by starting small, but being consistent, doing it over and over and over again, because then we are creatures of habit, and that's what we need. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of what I wanted to say. If you have any questions, if you want advice, you want to give feedback, if you want to get feedback, reach out. This is my IGDA email. Please do send me emails if you have anything. I'm happy to talk to you. Or if you have questions after this, I'm quite happy to answer those as well. But that's pretty much what I had to say or give here. And thank you for your time. I'm very happy to be here and seeing what's going on around the globe.
Yeah, thank you so much, mate, Häll. So yeah, it was one of the nice presentation of IGDA. So you have explained quite a bit about how it is going, what are the scenarios of that one. Yeah, so if anyone has the question, you can ask. So I have give the permission to unmute. So you can unmute your mic, and either you can ask, either you can speak, or you can type on the QA pan, on the QA chat. So there is one question: how do you balance event that is interesting for both for freshers and vegetarian, sorry for pronunciation, and to be consistent about it?
That's a very good question, and that's something we, if I'm completely honest, struggle with sometimes. But what we do is that we aim to have something every month. So some month the seminar will be like C-level decisions and stuff like that, and then you'll get like maybe 50 to 100 people, but they're C-level company people. Sometimes you have a thing where you talk about how to enter the industry, and then the newbies will be more interested. But the point is that the event, the meetup, have been made so that they're open and nice for everybody, and the seminar, that's like a small part of it. So then you come for the seminar, but even if the seminar doesn't interest you, you still come to the event, the meetup, and you can like meet these people there. The other thing we do is we have demo corners. Anyone is free to apply and send us like, hey, we want to come there and show put up a demo. So they will bring their computers or their consoles or their phones or whatever, set up. We'll provide them a space, and then they set up there, and then people can come play their games, and they can get feedback from veterans and newbies alike. And then that way they also make connections slowly and slowly. And then it's also easier if you apply to a company later, you can be like, hey, yeah, actually I showed my demo to your guys earlier, and then they can talk, and then kind of helps that. But it is a good question, and it is something that we constantly think of. But I think we found a pretty good ratio by doing both constantly. But we don't do it like every other month or something, because that would make people be like, this month maybe I'll skip the seminar or something because it's going to be a newbie stuff. We try to keep it as random as possible, so it's kind of like a surprise every time what's coming up. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Mitt. So one,
I also have a question,
Supriya,
if I can ask.
Yeah, you can ask.
Thank you, Häll. I have a few questions actually, but I'm gonna try and compress them into maybe 3. So just out of curiosity, I guess in the very beginning stage, before like big companies are established or big collectives are established, it's going to be a lot of different indie sort of creators making their own things, or small indie groups working on their own thing. So, and also like in that kind of a nascent scenario, there's no guarantee that there'll always be funding off the bat. People may have to like put in a lot of volunteer work to just get a game done. And of course, making a game isn't such an easy feat. Sometimes it takes years. So I'm very curious about what kind of social welfare system might exist there in Finland in terms of helping people who, for example, aren't really aren't earning rather anything in that span that they're making a game, right? Is there some kind of a backup? Like if they're lucky, they might get investors, but if they're not, then what kind of fallback does there exist in Finland? So that's one about social welfare. The other question is about, so you mentioned early on, how did the IGDA began? And you talked about how these demo people and mobile people were sort of mingling with each other. I'm sort of curious about how that mingling began. So Anil over here asked about, how do you balance events? And that's more about how it's going on right now. But in the early days, so these two different demographics, how did that sort of interdisciplinary collaboration, how did that sort of group mingling, what was the environment where that was able to happen? So that's the second question, the mingling part. And my third question is like, in today's game dev scene in Finland, where do most of these investments come from? Do they come from tech companies, or is it private investors? Are there special funds set up by the government or whatever? So investments. So basically 3 questions, one about investments, one about the mingling, and one about social welfare.
Thank you. Those are very good questions. So I'll start with the first one, social welfare. Real quickly, I actually just had a talk about this with IGDA Sweden, Noneda, which is Norway's similar association. And if you look at the Nordic countries, they produce a great amount of games compared to how small they are. Like if you think about all the Nordic countries, we're like, I don't know, 20, 25 million people. Where all the Nordics is smaller than Nepal combined, but still there's a lot of games that come out. And one of the big reasons, there's two like this that often come up, and one of them is there are very long, very dark, very boring winters, which is prime time to be sitting at home and developing like a game. But the other thing, which you mentioned, like, because you need money to survive, unfortunately, that's the world we live in. But so we do have social welfare. It's not a lot, but if you're out of money, you don't have a job, if you can't get a job, if you're like struggling, the state will help you. They will help you make sure that you have a place to stay. You have enough money, have to get clothes and food. But you're not going to live really luxury. It's not going to be a luxurious life. It's not going to be fancy, but you're going to be okay. And that will help you. One great example of this is if you know Notch, who created Minecraft. I'm sure everybody knows Minecraft, but for example, he didn't work for the most of the time when he was creating Minecraft because he could get the benefits, and that helped him to make this. And it is honestly one of the reasons that often comes up. So that's a very good question, and you're right on the money. That does help. I hope that answered the first question. Yeah. And second question was the mingling, right? So in the beginning, it was weirdly kind of easy because it was a bunch of people. Even if they have different background, you have mobile, you have very heavy PC people, but their interest and their love for both technical things and games was what kind of brought them together. And because Finland isn't the biggest country around, they heard that, hey, these people, they're doing, they're having an event, or they're like, hey, there's some people who make demo scene stuff, and they're like, okay. And then it just, what it took is someone to be like, hey, we are having an event where we have technical people talking, we have game people who are talking, we have artists here, like, and slowly the word's starting spreading. Like I said, the original meetings were like 5 people. And then we kept doing it because it was, first of all, it was fun, it was cool, and it was nice to talk with people who know about it. And you just kind of brought them together because you had the common interest in the beginning. Now it's grown so much, and now we have to do so much more. It has to be from writing to narrative design to shaders to like whatever. But like in the beginning, honestly, I use the word nerd in my presentation a lot. And I don't use it like in a negative sense. I consider myself a nerd, but it is like, it was just a bunch of nerds getting together, and we've tried to keep that like sort of as our core. You know, it's a bunch of nerds doing nerd stuff together, and that's kind of that helped bring the people together. Also, we like Helsinki was where everything happened for a long time. Now it's spread elsewhere, but like it did help that a lot of it happened in one city. Obviously, it will make things a little easier. And third question was investments, right? Yeah. Where do the investments come? I think you actually answered it pretty well yourself. You mentioned outside foreign investors, you mentioned state. So there is definitely, the state is very heavily pushing for games for a couple of years now, because they realized that that's a lot of tax. That's a lot of tax money. So they've been trying to support them. So the state does a lot of different sort of investments, or not even only investment. They can do like just the base funding in the beginning with like kind of no strings attached. Well, you just got to show that you're doing game stuff, but like you don't have to pay back. They don't get any shares. They're nothing. They're just supporting it. And then of course we get constantly from outside. There's always companies coming from outside of Finland who are like, hey, we're looking to acquire a couple of game studios. We want to have a little stake. So there's a lot of that. And because the industry's been living for a while, and this is something that is only possible because it's been for over, almost 30 years here. We have started accumulating enough capital within the industry that people can support new things. And if you look at Supercell, who's made Clash of Clans and these, or Rovio with Angry Birds, they have helped like 90%. Like there's some new studios and companies that they've essentially funded and created to start making their own stuff. And that happens a lot as well. Very roundabout answer. I don't know. Did these answer your questions?
Sure, thank you. And I have a quick follow-up question as well. So I feel like a lot of discourse that I see online about games, especially when it involves sort of game devs, this part of the world, it definitely tilts very heavily towards, the economic aspect of games. Games are an easy way to make money, that kind of stuff. Something goes viral and boom. And definitely that aspect is there. But of course, that's not the only thing that video games are used for. There's like a whole non-commercial sector as well, whether it's just for aesthetics or so on. So I'm also curious about, what it's like there, at least within the circles that you've maybe been around in. What games that are not specifically gamed for games that are not specifically geared to be commercial hits, but maybe have a different motivation in mind. So maybe some examples, or even like just what that scene is like, or what kind of people dabble in it, or how that scene exists, for example, because, you know, commercial games, so they will sort of self-sustain themselves in a way, but then these other sorts of games, you know, how do they exist? How do they thrive? That would be my add-on to that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That's an interesting question. So they exist, and some of them struggle, to be honestly and blunt. Like I said, my former company that we had, we made games for the children's hospital, which the point wasn't to make a like it wasn't a massive business, but it was at the same time making something. It was meant for the kids who are long-term hospital patients, so that they have something to play there and something to do. And the idea was to also get them to be physical. So it was an AR game where they had to look at this mountain, go walk around it, and find and search little animals there. So this kind of industry, it does exist in Finland. It is quite small, if I'm completely honest. Like I said, about 9% of the Finnish game industry is mobile, and mobile is geared towards being business first and games kind of second. I'm not going to say that like it's not a fast rule, and I know some people within the mobile game industry would not entirely agree, and I know there are mobile games, there are more games, but as a kind of like a rule of thumb, that's more true if you compare it to then our two non-mobile game companies, which are Housemarque, who made Returnal. We have Remedy, who made Control and Max Payne and Alan Wake and these games. And those, if you look at them, they obviously have a theme, a story, some sort of characters that they want to look into. And I would say there's more kind of artistic output in those than maybe like the majority of mobile games. But I think you're also talking about smaller ones like indies, and there are some who do that a lot. Have you ever heard of something called game jams? I don't know if they're a thing in Nepal. No? Yes?
I've heard of game jams, of course, and there's like Ludum Dare, and there's Itch.io game jams.
Yeah, so game jams is a big thing, and we have Finnish Game Jams, an association that pushes them very often. We have you know, outside of the pandemic, I would say we have like maybe 20 game jams at least a year around Finland. And there's been a lot of games that like come from those game jams, because it kind of, that's the pure essence of making a game. You just want to make, you have this idea, you have one weekend, let's go, let's make it. And then you just create this. For example, if you've ever played a puzzle game called Baba Is You, that's from a game jam. And it's an amazing puzzle game. It's very, very clever, very cool. And that came from there. And I think there are some of these, but they're, unfortunately or fortunately, depending how you see it, there are indie companies. There's like Noita, there's Baba Is You, there's, okay, well then there's some which are purely Finnish, and that doesn't make sense to point them out, but it is, I think, a global phenomenon that unfortunately, like the passionate part about the artistry of games is usually a little bit behind the money, but it does exist. And I would be really interested in at some point hearing from someone from Nepal to talk how it goes in Nepal about these games. But maybe, yeah, that was a very blah answer. Did it? I hope it satisfied your curiosity.
Thank you, Häll.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for the detailed question, and thank you, Supriya ji. So can you say that where are you from to all of us? It will be better, Supriya ji.
I'm sorry, me? Okay, yeah, I'm just based in Patan right here in Lalitpur.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So yeah, so with this, we will move up with our next speaker. So thank you all. Thanks for your wonderful presentation and for the question also.